The oldest records we have of spiritual communities in South Asia are forest ashrams mentioned in in the Vedas and later on described in Puranas and the epic poems as well. And the persons who were the residents of these ashrams were professional spiritual practitioners. Um, in the Vedic times, they were typically married persons, although there was certainly value placed on celibacy for certain periods of time and for certain reasons. Later, Buddhism took over this the idea, or took up the idea rather, of communities, and they made it a more strictly monastic um, institution where renunciation was emphasized. Later still, in the era which I like to think of as the Tantric era, starting at about 500 AD, both Buddhists and Hindus began practicing various kinds of tantric uh, approaches to spiritual practice, some of which included sexual ritual. Um, and the practitioners might or might not be married, but the practice, one's own practice, remains solitary. Unlike, say, Christianity, where the congregation is essential, or in Judaism, where the congregation is essential to the ritual. Um, in uh, Hindu practice in general tends to be more focused in the home rather than, say, in a temple, and each individual has his or her own method of practice, their own focus of their devotion or whatever kind of philosophical approach they have. Um, Yet, the institution of monasticism has persisted and has been revived at different times throughout the ages. Um, and by that I mean not just formal vows that monks or nuns can take, but the intentional living in community. So, spiritual community has advantages and disadvantages like any community. The advantages include the the sharing of resources and having a shelter instead of wandering, which is how um, Hindu monks, especially, or even Buddhist monks, were expected to live much of the year. They would come back to their monastery during the rainy season when they needed to get out of the rain. Makes sense. But in the more modern times, there was considered to be more safety, but in more modern psychological terms, there's potentially more support for your practice in a community, that it helps, especially in the beginning years, to have models of practice, that is, senior persons who have established practices that you can emulate and who can also offer guidance. Now, the Hindu monastery where I was a member in India, the Ramakrishna order, it was an unofficial practice of young monks seeking out typically one particular senior monk for special instruction and support. Um, in my own case, I didn't seek one out, but he sought me out. And the first day I arrived in India, I met the man who would become an important mentor to me, both for monastic life and the understanding of what that is and can be, and also for my work in gay tantra, because he pointed me in that direction. I think a bit unwittingly perhaps, but unerringly nevertheless. We were both, as it were, directed by forces bigger than ourselves. And although I think his vision for me was to live as an ascetic monk in India, which was a vision I shared for a while, but when it became clear to me after 2 attempts at that, that that was probably not my life path, then I took what I learned from him and began applying it to create my own path that officially had to be separated from that community, but with the idea of establishing a different kind of community, a gay spiritual community, in which celibacy would be allowed, certainly, and even appreciated, but not required or expected. And that one key difference was really all that I felt had to differ much from the experience, because I loved monastic life. I loved the study. I loved the meditation. I loved the sense of comradeship, community, cooking for one another, and communal chores like cleaning up and things like that could be done very joyfully. And all of that I missed and would love to see recreated, but without the onerous celibacy requirement. Now, over the years, I've come to appreciate how voluntary celibacy can be a useful practice within a community, because when people engage in sexual sharing, there can be, and ought to be, some kind of emotional connection. And within a spiritual community, the primary focus, the primary loyalty needs to be to the practice and to the community rather than to this guy or that guy. So whenever you start stirring up these romantic and sexual loving feelings, there tends to be a kind of bonding that can work against the community bonding if things aren't done correctly. So I appreciate now more how celibacy kind of clears that field and makes it much simpler. But I still think gay men especially need to have a spiritual environment in which there is a possibility of some kind of sexual expression until they don't want it anymore. And that also can happen very naturally in the course of one's life. So spiritual communities I see at Ashram West, which is the spiritual community I founded in 1997, which now exists primarily as an online community, but I envision as a residential community where dedicated gay men could live together, support one another in practice, enjoy all of the benefits that I experienced and enjoyed within a monastic, stable monastic community, but without the celibacy requirement. And so that's my idea of spiritual community, and I am hopeful that I will see that fulfilled in my lifetime.